I've got 4 sessions loaded up to show you the settings, my logic behind them, and detail exactly what the hell's going on. So let's get started. This first one is Ase Como Tu by Uday, and I didn't realize I was doing this very often until Uday sent me a message and he's like, dude, how did you make the kick drum slap? He might not have said it like that. He probably said it like this. And I had to go back into the session to actually look at what I was doing. It was really interesting. So the first thing I've done is I've just raised the aggression a little bit. And the reason why I did this is very specific. Okay, so if I bring this up, 0.47, you can see it slightly softens the top end, but that low end is a little bit bigger. That's where the real magic is. Let's go over to the Hammerstein graph. This is where the real magic is, and I've shown this in a previous video. Look at the harmonics on the low end. You get these third order harmonics right close up to the fundamental. So you get this texture in the subs, which is slightly bigger. Just by doing that, you're already ahead. But the magic here happens when we go over and across. What we're going to do is, where are we? We're going to hold shift and move this frequency slider up and down as we try and dial it in. Take a listen to this. For me, I just wanted the thump in your gut. You know, when the sub just sort of hits, especially when you're a live concert and you feel it in your stomach. That's why I'm down that low. Now, if I wanted it to slap a little bit harder like a EDM banger, I would have went higher up. But a little trick with this plugin is if you hold shift, you can monitor roughly where that multiplier is focusing that EQ on. That's number one. Number two is a lot of people I've seen online, they just slide transient or body and go, oh, it sounds so good on the transient. But if I show you this at default, which is -1, you'll realize almost everything is transient according to this. And that's not good because then everything is getting the boost. There's no like contrast there. So what we do is we get this sensitivity while it's playing and drag it down just so the transients are hitting when the low end is. So have a listen. So that's a really important feature when you're using this EQ. It's an EQ, it's a harmonic box, it's a compressor. I'm talking about compression, and this is dynamics. Okay, so we're manipulating what's going on here. And then finally what you do is you got your threshold, which you dial back, and then you boost the range. So that's actually what's happening here. If I put this range off, it's just a static cut there, but we're going to boost this range to expand on it. Simple. So we've got more harmonics on the subs, we've got movement in there and contrast, and that is just one way. I don't know why, I'm just gravitating towards using Michelangelo EQ a lot, and this is a really cool way to just leverage the tone of the box, but also some of the additional feature sets using the transient mode and the body mode and holding shift. One of my subscribers told me this and it's helped me a whole lot. Hold shift when you're using the frequency multiplier so you can dial in the exact range of energy where you're adding it. The next way I'm using compression, I'm using almost on every mastering session, is using the vintage limiter pre-maximizer. Okay, so maximizer, everybody has their own style of how they dial it in, but this vintage limiter is magical because it pushes the low-level detail just before the ceiling. So you get this thickness without needing to use any of the limiting action. So if you're in analog mode, the way I dial this in is I just click delta and I'll dial this threshold down until I hear it starting to limit, and then I'll back it off a bit. So those little spikes on the bottom there, that's actually the only time the limiter was engaging in gain reduction. The rest of what you're hearing in the delta signal there isn't actually limiting. It's almost like a soft clipping style, if you can call it that. So anyway, that is just a free little tip. If you want to get a little bit more loudness before your maximizer, the vintage limiter beforehand, just pushing it slightly, just ever so slightly, gives you that little bit extra. It's like 0.2 decibels of extra loudness, but I do it every master because it's free gains for very little, if no compromise to your final sound. This next one I call the EDM Mix Bus Pumper. If you've got a pretty neutrally balanced EDM mix and you just want a bit of pump, like a bit of movement, thick, in and out, especially in the subs and the low end. This is a preset I made, thick A, when I was getting really deep dive on Unisum, and I usually pull this out whenever I need to make low end thicker. And I've level matched this before and after. Take a listen and I'll take you through each of these settings and what's actually going on. It just makes it juicier in the bottom. So what's actually happening here? So the first thing is the weighting for the multiband detector. Similar to like how Luca Predalesi used the mid-range to drive the overall compression. That's what's happening here. -2 decibels on the low end and the top end to make sure it's not driving the compression too hard. The mid-range is. But then we've got some attack release modifiers here. So what happens is if the compressor is compressing a lot, the loud time of it, so if there's a lot of compression going on, the release actually gets slower, and you'll be able to see that here on this little light here. It will become slower when it's compressing a lot more. But when it's also compressing a lot more, the release time quickens, so it pumps back up. So what happens is the attack starts to slow down because they're getting a lot of compression, and the release time starts to speed up, so it pumps back into itself. So that's how you get that pumpy sort of pulse in the subs, and that's where the magic of these modifiers happen. The quiet time, when there's not a lot of compression going on, the release time slows down quite a bit. But these are the modifiers here which I use to manipulate this setting to the way I want it. So what I want you to do is focus on these light markers here and here on the release. And you'll notice under heavy compression, the attack becomes much slower and the release comes much quicker. I'm using that all the time on EDM tunes. Not all the time. Like I said, when a tune needs that pump, I'm using this all the time, this Unisum setting. And you can get that setting. I'm going to give you all the settings in my newsletter tomorrow. I'm going to just send out an email, here are all the settings. So if you want to get them, make sure you subscribe in the description. The next form of compression is just general mix bus glue. And I use TDR Katalnikov for this all the time. Almost every session where I'm using compression on the mix bus. Not every session I use compression on the mix bus, but most I do, I use this one. It's a free compressor. And what I have here are settings based on the lowest frequencies of the mix, okay? And I've got a whole video detailing this, but these are just my go-to starting settings. It's very slow attack, very slow release, and I'll show you how I dial this in. So the lowest frequency in this mix is around 25 hertz. And it means a 200 millisecond attack time, 200 millisecond release, very slow, 2-to-1 ratio. But my aim here is to listen to the delta, dial in this crest factor, and then get the peaks releasing when it's peak or punch and releasing the RMS when it's sustained portion. That's really important. So I listen to the delta, I dial this peak or crest in, and even manipulate the threshold sometimes for it. So let's have a listen. And that's how I get that dialed in. Now we can listen to it before and after.
Still in this flashback, do you know how much I miss when I get in my car? Mulholland Drive, West Canyon Road on the eastern side. I swear we'd smoke and draw halos on my window.
Next way I use compression in a mix is dealing with sibilance. I tend to use Ozone's modules for clarity or stabilizer for dealing with sibilance. I use stabilizer for the overall tone, but clarity for the sibilance worked really well because it helped keep everything together and tight in the top end. But whenever any sibilance came in, it would duck it really nicely. Take a listen to this. And obviously the tilt is 2.5 decibels, so it's much warmer the tone it's going for because I'm trying to lose some of that top end when it gets a bit sibilant. But take a listen.
Telltale heart that's been beating underneath my doormat. It's silent when I'm kissing up and down your back, gripping on your arm tats, living in this flashback.
So it ducks the S's, but it keeps the upper mids nice and together. So that's my little trick at the moment for de-essing. And I'm using that quite often in mixes. I'm either using clarity or a combination of clarity and stabilizer to manage that top end or mid-range to top end. And finally, this is how I turn this snare drum into an absolute thick hitting brick. So take a listen to this snare in the final chorus. So that was good, but I wanted this thick brick hitting you in the chest on those snares because it's quite a driving 4 on the floor outro and you want to feel and rock out to it. Here's what I did. Knock into the most insane L1 limiter setting, everything maxed out. Take a listen to this. So that's the original snare. Then we're going to add knock. And now we squeeze the hell out of it with the L1 limiter. Now, we'll play the original signal and then we'll mute the parallel and bring the parallel in and out. Fucking hits beautifully. Now let's play it in the mix and we'll start with it off and then turn it on. So those are common ways I really enjoy using compression or dynamic processing in my mixing and mastering sessions. I hope you enjoyed this, and until next time, take care.